This is a tutorial from the librarians at Lone Star College. The purpose of this tutorial is to teach users how to evaluate information. It's a good idea to be skeptical of the information that you encounter. Every day you encounter information, whether it's watching online videos, listening to podcasts, talking with your friends and family, or listening to your professors in class. Some of this information could be accurate. Some could be wildly inaccurate. In general, you should be skeptical of information because much of it is incorrect. But you should be thoughtfully skeptical. That is, skeptical of particular pieces of information for particular reasons. This video will show you how to evaluate information that you encounter so that you're less likely to believe information that is wrong. There are different systems to evaluate information that librarians often teach. Some librarians use what is called the CRAP test. Good information should have currency, relevance, authority, accuracy, and purpose. Others use the acronym RADAR: rationale, authority, date, accuracy, and relevance. Both of these systems and others are just fine. Here's one that doesn't have an acronym that's easy to remember: authority, currency, objectivity, and verifiability. ACOV? That's not even a word. Nonetheless, these four principles of evaluating information will serve you well. The first principle is authority. When you encounter information, ask yourself, does this person have any idea what he or she is talking about? For example, let's say that you are sick and need surgery. You'd probably want to get operated on by someone who is a qualified medical doctor, not someone who spent 5 minutes reading an article on Wikipedia. That's an extreme hypothetical example, but it illustrates the principles of authority. When you encounter a person giving you information, see if that person has the educational or professional qualifications that indicate competence on the subject. College degrees in a subject or years of experience working in a field could be evidence of such competence. A person with these qualifications is an authority on that topic. Now, just because a person is highly educated and experienced in a field doesn't mean that person is absolutely correct. It's possible to be an expert and still be completely wrong. If a person giving you information has authority on that topic, his or her qualifications are evidence to support the assumption that his or her information is correct, but they are not conclusive proof of being correct. The second principle is currency. When you encounter information, ask yourself, is this information up to date? Let's say, for example, that we're researching information about global warming. If we find a book on that topic published in 1990, such as this library book, that would be out of date. Our knowledge of the sciences has grown since then. The climate itself may have changed, so this source of information is out of date. As another example, let's say that we're researching the history of the American Civil War, which was from 1861 to 1865. This 1990 biography of Confederate General Ewell is not out of date. That's because, unlike global warming, the Civil War is a closed event. It's not going to change because it's in the past. Now, our knowledge of the past can change. Historians could discover additional documents from the Civil War era or interpret aspects of the Civil War differently. But our basic picture of the history of the Civil War is not going to radically shift since 1990. So a source of information about the Civil War published that far back in the past is still current. It's still up to date. So when you're evaluating the currency of a source, you have to think about the topic that you're researching. For some topics, such as science and technology, information goes out of date very quickly. For some topics, such as history or government, information goes out of date more slowly. For some topics, such as philosophy, information never goes out of date. You can read a work of philosophy that is thousands of years old, and it's still current, because it speaks to an eternal human condition. So to evaluate currency, you need to ask two questions in order. First, when would information on this topic go out of date? Then you can ask yourself, is this information source up to date? The third principle is objectivity. When you encounter information, ask yourself, does this author or publication have a bias or agenda? Bias is most obvious when there is a conflict of interest. For example, advertisements are trying to sell you something. They depict their products or services in the best possible light in order to convince you to buy them. Conflict of interest is a fairly obvious form of bias. If someone stands to earn money by having an opinion, they're more likely to have that opinion. What is less obvious is ideological bias. Each and every one of us has a set of basic beliefs that shape how we see the world. These basic beliefs include answers to questions such as, what is good and evil? What is beautiful and what is ugly? What is a good life? Why do people succeed or fail at life? Why do societies succeed or fail? What should be the role of government in society? What should be the role of religion in society? Your answers to all of these questions and more reflect your own personal ideology. These ideological beliefs filter how you understand the world, how you understand information that you encounter, and how you describe to other people the things that you believe to be true. When you share information with other people, that information is necessarily filtered through your ideological beliefs. You have an ideological bias, as does everyone else in the world. This is especially obvious with controversial topics, such as politics. People have different political beliefs, and those beliefs shape how they interpret political events. So because everyone has an ideological bias, perhaps the question we should ask is not, does this author have a bias? But instead, what is the author's bias? How does that bias affect the content of this information? Assume that the author of an information source has a bias. Ask yourself what it could be and take that bias into account when evaluating the information that person gives you. Ideological bias is everywhere. It's even in this video. This video is the product of one librarian, and its content necessarily reflects the ideological biases of that person. Here's an example. A few minutes ago, I said that you could read a work of philosophy that is thousands of years old, and it would still be current because it speaks to an eternal human condition. Eternal human condition is a loaded ideological phrase. There are philosophers who think that there is no eternal human condition. There are even philosophers who would sharply disagree with me about the notion that everyone has an ideological bias. So you should be aware of ideological bias everywhere, including from me. The fourth principle of evaluating information is verifiability. When you encounter information, ask yourself, can you verify the author's claims? If you hear gossip, do you assume that what you hear is true or just a rumor? Verifiability is the whole purpose of citing your sources and preparing bibliographies for your papers in college. Your professors want to be able to verify all of your information claims. If you encounter anonymous sources cited in news sources, be skeptical. You have no way of verifying the information that you're reading is true. Verifiability is especially important with statistics. Let me give you an example. This is Milo Kress, an environmental activist. When he was 9 years old, he launched a public campaign to eliminate disposable drinking straws, which are commonly used once and then thrown into the trash. Milo said that Americans use 500 million disposable drinking straws per day. This number was uncritically cited by many, many, many professional news organizations. There are ways that professional statisticians can conduct national consumer studies that accurately assess how many times people use a particular product. These are complex, sophisticated research methods. 9-year-old Milo Kress did not use them. He called up drinking straw manufacturers and made a rough estimate based on the numbers that they gave him. That's how he reasoned that Americans use 500 million drinking straws per day. A number that was then cited in the news many times without mentioning that it came from a 9-year-old child without professional training in statistical analysis. A number that was then used to argue for laws to restrict the use of disposable drinking straws. This is a problem that could have been stopped early on if enough people had said, "Milo, where did you get this statistic from?" It's a problem that could have been stopped if more people attempted to verify the information that they encountered. This incident is a good illustration of why evaluating information is so important. It's not just something that you use in school for school assignments. It's part of everyday life. Every day, in many different formats, you're encountering information. When someone gives you information, ask yourself, does this person know what he or she is talking about? Is this information up to date? What is this person's bias? How does that bias shape the content? Can you verify this information? Ask these questions and you'll be a better consumer of information throughout your whole life.